Well, hi everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy. You know, the other day I was on a Flat Earth channel giving a presentation and doing a question and answer session on the black swan photograph that the Flat Earth seems to be infatuated with right now. And one of the photographs that I brought up as part of my evidence was this one. This is a photograph of the two oil rigs in question in the black swan photo. You have a nice clear horizon right here, minimal refraction, and you see that the far oil rig is below the horizon and the near oil rig at the horizon or a little after it. And it's pretty clear-cut evidence of curvature as opposed to the very distorted and diffracted black swan photograph. Well, the host felt that he had a gotcha moment. He goes, well, this photograph was taken 1 foot off the beach and there were 4-foot waves, and all you're looking at right here is a wave rolling in. And I got to thinking, that's rather interesting. First of all, it's a ridiculous assertion. But second of all, if you had 4-foot waves, why would you put your camera at 1 foot? Wouldn't that just be a confounding variable that didn't need to be there? Why not put it at 5 feet so that you were above the waves and you could get a good clear shot of the oil rigs? And then it occurred to me, flat earthers are really quite aware of refraction in the atmosphere, which is why they love to take photographs and videos from just above the surface of the water to maximize the effective refraction. Then they can support their flat earth narrative by saying the horizon is too far away. They don't mention the fact that parts of objects that they're looking at are still beneath the curve of the horizon, but that's neither here nor there. The other thing is, why would you take a photograph at 1 foot if there were 4-foot waves? And it occurred to me that flat earth science, if you want to call it that, and their experiments are not designed to prove anything. They're designed primarily to raise questions and leave wiggle room in case they get called on it, as I was calling them on the black swan photograph. Now, the fact that this photograph right here destroys the black swan photograph was the reason that they popped out this, well, it was a wave. That's all it is. It's just a wave. Why wouldn't you show the video that this screenshot was taken from and show the waves going up and down and intermittently exposing the bottom of that far oil rig? That would clear it up right there. Why wouldn't you take the photograph from 5 feet of elevation to make sure that you were above the waves so that you didn't have this problem in the first place? Would it have changed the photograph that much? Probably not. There was a huge bit of refraction going on the day of the black swan photograph and not much here. You could clearly demonstrate both. But then it occurred to me that there's a reason that they do this, and that is flat earth science, if you want to call it that. When they do these experiments, are not trying to settle any questions. What they're trying to do is they're trying to raise more questions. Oh, look at this thing. I see more than I should. Well, here's why you see more than you should, and here's the math behind it. Oh, well, there was a wave. You know, it's a convenient out for them. So then I got to thinking, you know, one of the reasons that I got into the flat earth debunking community is I wanted to explore the reasons that people in the 21st century still believe the earth is flat. Despite the fact that we have WGS 84, which precisely defines the shape of the earth, we have film photographs from space showing the earth to be round. We can clearly measure the horizontal drop. We can only partially see objects behind the horizon and note that their bottoms are missing, but their tops are clearly within our vision. Yet still, these convoluted excuses keep coming. So let's go ahead and explore why people still think the earth is flat in the 21st century. We're going to get opinions from several different people. One is Johnny Harris, which is why people believe the earth is flat in the 21st century. We're going to have a look at Dangerfield, who talks about the sad, lonely men of the flat earth movement. And then we're going to get a professional opinion from Dr. Todd Grande on the 7 myths of flat earth. So cue up the music and let's go.
If you were able to look through the perspective of a person who thinks the world is flat, you would see this. The North Pole is right here in the center. The continents splayed out over this plain. And here on the edges, you'd run into a 150-foot wall of ice, guarded by NASA employees with guns.
And how far that ice goes outwards. And when people try to go down there, they get turned away at gunpoint and put in prison.
The heavens are a dome that arcs over the flat Earth. The sun, the moon, the stars, they're all just little balls of light in the sky that move around just above the Earth's surface. There are loads of people who actually believe this. YouTube channels and Facebook pages, you'll see hundreds of thousands of followers. Google searches for the term flat earth proof over time look like this. It's become incredibly popular. And recently a poll showed that only 84% of Americans agree with the statement, "I have always believed the world is round." 84%. And if you're 18 to 24, that's more like 66%, which is like dangerously close to half. What is going on here?
Now the North Pole is the center of a deep ocean, whereas the South Pole is the center of a high plateau, which averages 7,000 or 8,000 feet in altitude.
This is frustrating, and what's even more frustrating is every time I try to look into this and understand it, all I see is coverage of like flat earther conventions and like interviews with these people.
We absolutely know for a fact this ain't it.
These interviews are interesting, but I want to understand like how someone with a thinking brain can actually get behind this. What is this actual belief? Where does it come from? And how do potentially millions of people believe that the Earth is flat?
The water is completely flat, as far as we can see and as far as we've measured, and the horizon is completely flat.
Now, just to get warmed up, Johnny Harris started off with a flat Earth experiment. On his trip home from Mexico, he took the suggestion of Mr. D. Marble here and brought a bubble level with him on the plane to see whether or not the airplane would dip its nose to go around the curve. Wonder of wonders, it was actually nose up a hair.
I'm seeing all the evidence. What if the Earth actually is flat? The plane wasn't dipping. The level was flat. Okay, I'm kidding, let's get into this. I've been in the weeds learning about the flat Earth experience, what people believe and why and where it all came from. And here's what I've learned. Number one, flat earthers have become a thing just in the past couple hundred years. So by like 205 BC, you've got these really smart Greek people making experiments that are like observing a globe-shaped Earth. Over the next several centuries, eventually this would just become the widespread thing among anyone who was doing experimentation on the world. And eventually, nobody believed the Earth was flat. Even in like the medieval times, like it was a consensus that the Earth was a globe. So in short, flat earthers weren't a thing during this time. Even though literally in elementary school, I was taught that Christopher Columbus and like his voyage was somehow to prove that the Earth was round or maybe it was flat and that there was like some debate around that. That's actually a total legend and I have no idea why I was taught that in elementary school. How did that happen? I actually am genuinely curious, like how did that happen? The fact is, Christopher Columbus, the Catholic Church, the Spanish patrons, no one thought the Earth was flat.
Well, that's right, boys and girls. We've known that the Earth is a sphere for just over 2,000 years. It really wasn't a question at any time in our history since that time, until the early 1800s. Christopher Columbus was not setting off to prove that the Earth was round. He was setting off to try and find a new trade route to India. He grossly underestimated the circumference of the Earth, and quite frankly would have been lost at sea had he not run square into an unremembered continent. Recall that he didn't even find the New World. More than likely, that was the Vikings 400 or 500 years before Columbus sailed.
But then, they became a thing. Any sort of flat earther movement didn't actually come around, ironically, until science was really starting to heat up. During the mid-1800s, a huge amount of scientific breakthrough was happening. The scientific method was taking off, and huge breakthroughs in biology, physics, anatomy, and mathematics were taking place. But at the time, there were also people who were becoming uncomfortable with how advanced scientific methods were getting. These guys were like, hold on a second, you have all these fancy new tools to inquire into the world and to understand reality, but these tools are getting like too sophisticated and too abstract and theoretical. They're becoming too disconnected from like what I can see and understand and touch and feel. They wanted to bring science back to what it had been for a really long time, which is that like a person goes out, uses simple tools like a telescope to look at the world and to make conclusions about how the world works. So it's the 1800s, science is like having its time, and you have these guys, usually from like the US and the UK, who want to throw out this growing body of like amazing advancements in science, and they start to do experiments.
Yeah, I think you may be onto something. There could be an argument made for people fearing scientific development and people fearing that there was becoming a scientific class versus the rest of us, with only part of us understanding the world around us. I could buy that to some extent. However, I think you're missing something important. These people were religious zealots. Their concern was not that people were becoming distant from science. They were concerned that science was interfering with people's faith in God. That if science discovered the secrets of the universe, what place would there be for the Creator or God? That was what drove many of these people to begin with, and that continues to drive them to this day. I firmly believe that the vast majority of flat Earth is just warmed over creationism or intelligent design. They use the exact same arguments, and in many cases, they're the same people. Now, obviously, there are groups of people that are not in that category that believe in the flat Earth, but they're few and far between. The majority of people that are in flat Earth are simply creationists that believe in the biblical account of Genesis and have a desire to think that the Earth is someplace special at the center of the universe that was created specifically for us.
Here's what those experiments look like. So it's the summer of 1838, England, up in the county of Cambridgeshire, which literally sounds like a place in The Lord of the Rings. So it's the summer of 1838, and the atom had just been discovered, and the Doppler effect is like being fleshed out. And then you've got this guy. His name is Samuel Rowbotham, but he goes by the pseudonym Parallax, which is actually a pretty dope name. Like if I were a DJ, I would totally go with like Parallax. Anyway, Parallax decides, even though all this science is happening, he thinks it's time to reopen up the debate about whether or not the Earth is a globe, which was like literally settled thousands of years earlier. But he's like, no, let's do it. And he finds this canal system that is incredibly straight. This canal goes on for almost 10 kilometers, like 6 miles of just a straight line. This guy says, if the Earth is a globe, and people say it's 25,000 miles in circumference, then if I look at a straight line, after the first mile, the curvature of the Earth would mean that the canal would now be 8 inches lower. After 2 miles, it would be 32 inches lower. After 3 miles, 72 inches lower, meaning like 6 feet, almost 2 meters, and so on. So he thinks eventually the dip from the curvature of the Earth would be so great that you could easily observe it. So he gets in the water, he puts a telescope right above the surface of the water, and then puts a boat on the canal with a 1 meter tall post on it. So what he wants to see is if the Earth is curved, if it's a globe, this post will start to disappear over the horizon. So he does it. The boat goes away, it goes the entire 6 miles of the canal, and it stays in sight the entire time. It doesn't dip over the horizon. And he's stoked. He's like, man, I just proved that the Earth is flat. And I did it with a telescope and a boat. Like, screw you, science. Like, I'm making breakthroughs right here in Cambridgeshire. And then he writes this book, where he fleshes out this experiment and several others that he does. But wait, this experiment's like kind of legit, right? Like, it adds up. Like, his numbers were all correct about the circumference and the dip of the curvature. Like, why didn't it dip? Like, why was the boat still in sight? There's nothing wrong with this experiment. Parallax, got that great name. Maybe he was onto something. No, this is stupid. This is like a 3rd grade science experiment in your backyard. This experiment doesn't take into account how the natural world actually works and how light behaves and refracts based on the different air densities. This is like stuff that people already figured out, and like Parallax is sitting there getting wet in a canal, like trying to observe this on his, no, this does not prove anything. But Parallax didn't want to hear any of this. He didn't want to talk about atmospheric refraction and air density and how light behaves in different media. Too complicated, too abstract. You can't touch and feel that stuff.
Doesn't this all sound quite familiar? Atmospheric refraction is a well-understood phenomenon. It's been well understood for hundreds of years. Parallax put his telescope just over the water. Just like flat earthers today love to put their little P900s and P1000s inches above the water and say, oh, look, I can see things I shouldn't be able to see. It's the same song and dance. It's the same parlor trick that Parallax started back in 1838, and it's just being repeated today. It was wrong then. It's still wrong now. Why is it that we have to keep saying it's wrong? It's a mystery to me, unless there's another motive. And what would that motive be? Prevent science from disproving God. Show that we're in a special place in the universe that doesn't obey the laws that everything else in the universe obeys, because it's special and created just for us.
You can't touch and feel that stuff. Instead, Parallax sees science and observing reality as a much simpler task. In his book, he says, nature speaks to us in a peculiar language, in the language of phenomena. She answers at all times the questions which are put to her. Just like go out and put a question to Mother Nature and she'll answer it. As scientific methods become more sophisticated, they become harder for you and me to understand. Parallax and his canal experiments are a reaction to all of this. They are a call for a simplification of scientific methods and a return of the senses as the primary force for understanding reality.
You know, one of the first things that I learned in science when I was about 12 was that in science, you can't rely on your senses to accurately measure things, accurately weigh things. That's why we have devices that help us make precise measurements, like Robotham's telescope. That's a device that enhances our own natural vision to allow us to see things in the distance. His telescope had a crosshair on it, so he didn't have to estimate where the center of a field of view was. You know, these devices are used by Flat Earth when it's convenient to them, but they're not used when Flat Earth is trying to make an assertion, which is a measurable assertion, that they don't want to have to support. For example, how many Flat Earthers have said the horizon rises to eye level and then pulled out a water level to prove it? That would be 0. And the reason that they don't do it is with something as simple as a water level, you can prove that the horizon does not rise to eye level. It dips below eye level. But if you don't measure it, you can assert anything you want. And that's the game that Flat Earth plays.
He called his method of reductionist pseudoscience the Zetetic method. He says that honesty of thought is to look at truth in the face, not the side face, but the full front. Just look at it, go out and observe it for yourself. He was among several scientists and mathematicians at the time who were on this train of let's use really simplified reductionist math and science to prove that the Earth is actually flat. This argument of the flat Earth flickered for a little bit in the 1800s, gained a little bit of traction, but then eventually it died out until just a few years ago.
I refuse to be another vegetable. Pseudoscience garbage will to me be unacceptable. Anyone with eyes to see don't have to be susceptible. Dispose of your globe in the nearest waste receptacle.
There is no curvature to this Earth. There is no motion to this Earth.
If you just accept the globe model with no understanding of the flat and no clear evidence for the ball Earth, do you see the problem there?
Flat Earthers are back. And their methods are very similar to what Parallax was doing in the 1800s.
I can understand why you missed this because I don't think that you're really into the Flat Earth or watch it very much. But there's a reason that modern Flat Earthers are resurrecting Samuel Robotham. And that's because the modern Flat Earth movement started with a gentleman that's a yoga instructor in Thailand by the name of Eric Dubé. who's got a very soothing, sing-song, hypnotic type of voice. And Eric Dubay started making YouTube videos where he literally just read Roohif. And as a result, people started watching his videos and started repeating the things that he was saying. The horizon rises to eye level. The earth is observably flat. Water always finds its level. That's what the modern flat earth movement came from, and that's why it sounds so much like the Zetetic method pioneered by Roohif back in the mid-19th century. It's the same thing, it's just being repeated.
And this is data. This is repeatable, observable, measurable.
If you take the time to learn, you will change your mind. There's no doubt. The only reason people think they live on a spinning ball is willful ignorance.
They're still zooming into horizons, but now they have hordes of visual stuff to play around with. They now have airplanes. They now have satellite imagery to play around with. They now have the moon landing to dissect. And now they're taking levels onto airplanes, like I did.
Your plane can't go upside down. Here's the thing, globe hugger.
Like the flat earthers in the 1800s, the flat earthers today want to use their own intuition and senses to understand reality. And in the process, they reject and ignore the huge body of science that we all live with today.
So people that have physics degrees, astronomy degrees, they got their degree by regurgitating what their teacher or the books told them.
Instead of trigonometry and telescopes and canals, the flat earthers today use videos and photos circulated on the internet.
The azimuthal equidistant projection map that the USGS actually uses is the flat Earth map.
Wait, did he just say azimuthal equidistant projection? That's like my favorite projection. Is that the flat Earth map? Don't f with me in projections. I take them very seriously. In true internet fashion, this new current movement of flat earthers has become just a bunch of bumper sticker type assertions and images that are really easy to share. Just like parallaxes experiments, these methodologies completely ignore the way the natural world is observed to work by like thousands of years of scientific consensus.
You know, the other thing that I find absolutely amazing too is the resiliency of the flat Earth. For example, Blue Marble Science and I went out and proved the curve of the Earth and the circumference of the Earth. Not a big deal. It was very easy for us to do. This morning, I took photographs of clouds being underlit by the sun at dawn. Again, proving the spherical Earth. Disproving the claims of the flat Earth as recently as this week, Phuket Word put out a video claiming that the clouds are never underlit by the sun. Yet, they continue to make the same assertions again and again and again. It's almost as if they're not listening. Here's the data. Look at the data. Well, I see your data. I don't understand your data. I will ignore your data, and I will continue to make my own assertions based on something that I heard on a YouTube video. Yep, that's science for you.
But if you go to the FAQ page of the Flat Earth Society, you'll see what they're after here. They believe that evidence is, quote, relying on your own senses to discern the true nature of the world around us. That's the best evidence. And in that vein, that's what these people are doing.
I mean, so in the physics world today, do they not understand that convex lenses or fisheye lenses or GoPro add a distorted view?
So, what have I learned from all of this? From my understanding, the Flat Earther movement, whether from the 1800s or today on the internet, is actually not totally about the shape of the Earth. This movement has a much broader message built into it. There's a reason why 1984 is like in the canon of the Flat Earther movement. 1984 has nothing to do with the shape of the Earth. What it does have to do with is being skeptical of big institutions that are probably watching you, that are probably controlling your life, that are probably feeding you bad information to retain power.
We're not crazy, we're just sick of the lies.
Here's the thing. Most of the knowledge we have about the natural world and the universe, we've never seen. We've never seen exoplanets or the deep space telescopes that tell us so much about our universe. Instead, we read about this stuff. We benefit from its findings. We pay our taxes to fund more of it. Science is like a tall tower, and each individual researcher and institution adds a little brick to that tower, each brick resting on the one below it. No one person sees or understands all of the bricks. Instead, we have a system of debate, review, scrutiny that only allows the most accurate information to be added to the tower. And honestly, I don't think humans are well suited to adapt to this very impersonal way of understanding the world. We have evolved over millions of years with our senses as our main driver of survival. And now we live in a society that is run by big systems and impersonal institutions that we will never touch and feel, much less understand. And that's why we have people who believe the world is flat, despite conclusive evidence to the contrary. This belief is a proxy for a much larger paradigm that mistrusts anything that you can't touch and feel. And so yeah, I'm really sad that only 84% of people can say with certainty that they've always believed the world is a globe. And that's 64% for younger people. Only 64% of people. Like that just blows my mind, and it's incredibly sad. But despite this belief, this movement, these conventions, this total lunacy, science will continue to do its thing. It will continue to go out, observe the world with these amazing tools that we have, come back, debate it, and add to this tower of knowledge that helps us see the world as it really is.
Well, I think that was a very nice presentation. Again, I think that he is missing a little part of the picture here, though. He does touch on the fact that people feel disconnected from advanced science nowadays simply because of the equipment required to do it. You know, we don't all have particle accelerators in our basement. Come to think of it, I live on a lake. I don't even have a basement. And that people are suspicious of large institutions like the military or NASA or big pharma. I get all that. But the problem that you're running into is that the main thing behind all of this is that people have a need to feel as though they're special somehow. That this place that we live in, the planet Earth, was made specifically for us. That it's different than everything else, and it has a creator that created it for us. The other thing that I think is a major problem with this that he did not touch on is the lack of critical thinking skills. The lack of respect for actual evidence. The reason that even when you are confronted with the fact this is a coffee cup, you can hear it. It's a coffee cup. It's ceramic. It weighs this. It's this big around, etc. You have people that'll argue that that's a fork because they only believe in forks. And they cannot accept evidence to the contrary to their belief. That's why I say in many cases, the main goal in the flat earth is the support of the narrative. And that's why they ignore all evidence that is contrary to their flat earth narrative. So let's go on to the next one. Let's look at the special people that are in flat earth, according to somebody by the name of Dangerfield.
And focus. All right there. I'm a bit worried I might have popcorn in my teeth. I have absolutely nailed how to make butter toffee popcorn, and I might make a video how to make it, because that way you can lose all your teeth and get fat like I am almost certainly going to. Anyway, flat earth. Imagine you're a 30-something bloke somewhere in the developed West, and life hasn't turned out quite like you thought. You know, you're not a professional footballer. You're not the lead singer in a band. You're not a soldier or a fireman. You know, you're just stacking shelves somewhere, going out of your mind with boredom. Your wife's left you, if you even had one. Not really a whiff of any romance in a while. It's kind of going wrong, your life. You're not happy with it. It's not fulfilling. You've got no status. Nothing's happening. You're in a groove. And the groove is going nowhere fast. And then imagine something comes along Something where you can see other people who seem to be quite a lot like you have managed to achieve a certain amount of status from. They've managed to achieve a community and be part of that community. They've managed to find something that they can blame for all their problems, because there's this big lie. And if that's a lie, loads of stuff could be lies.
You know, when somebody's trying to create a mass movement, the thing that they really want to do is they want to instill a sense of community to gather up disenfranchised people. And this is what Dangerfield is referring to here. And the easiest way to do that is to find a common enemy. It's not your fault that you're having a problem, it's their fault, and I'll lead you and we will make it right. This has been used since the dawn of history to try and develop movements, be they revolutions or political parties or whatever. It's us against them, and I'll lead you. And that is something that is very important in the Flat Earth movement. And it's a movement. It's not a scientific endeavor. It's not even a topic of scientific discussion, as has been said in the past. This is a sense of community that people can belong to and achieve importance in that they wouldn't otherwise have in their lives. So let's go ahead and continue.
So the reason my life is so shit is because I'm living in this very weird lie. And that's what the flat earth is for these people. They get immediate attention. People are interested in them, even if it's just to debunk them. These people turn up on TV shows, they turn up on the news, and they're not too bright. And you can see them in their interviews, like they're over the moon that they're getting attention. They're smiling. It's like, oh, people like me. People want to know what I think.
There is a basic human need for a sense of acceptance and to be admired. And a lot of the people that are in the flat earth, especially in the higher echelons, the t-shirt sellers, as I say, they love the admiration of the t-shirt buyers. And it's a big part of their life. Do you honestly think some of these people at the flat earth conventions get this type of attention in their normal lives, in their families, at work, if they have a job? Perhaps not, but if they go to a flat earth convention and they're a speaker, they're important.
Even when what they think is void of any real substance. This is how the flat earth functions to these people. It supplies them. It gives them what they need. A sense of community, a sense of status, a sense of importance, and something to blame for the state of their lives.
You know, one thing that I think deserves note, and that is with the advent of the internet, and especially social media platforms like YouTube, these people have an opportunity to find each other and develop these communities. One of the big reasons that Roohif did not develop a strong sense of community back in the mid-19th century is that it was very difficult to find other people that thought the way you did. With YouTube, all you have to do is a quick search. And there they are. They're all over the place. So this enables you to find these people that you can then develop a community with and have a sense of community. I think this represents a pretty decent insight into the motivations behind the Flat Earth movement.
A sense of community, a sense of status, a sense of importance, and something to blame for the state of their lives. Because if the world isn't round, and we've been lied to by governments, by NASA, by our teachers, by our parents, by everyone, what else isn't true? I mean, how are you meant to survive in a world like that? How are you meant to do well if you're not part of the inner workings of such deception? Of course my life's shit. It's meant to be. These people have kept me down.
Now, this is another thing that you see in the Flat Earth quite a bit, and that is a belief in other conspiracy theories. The 9/11 conspiracy, the anti-vax conspiracy, the moon landing hoaxes. These are people that have a sense of feeling special because only they are awake and have this special knowledge that the rest of us sheeple just don't have access to, but they've sussed it out.
And then on the other side, looking at the same thing, of course we don't live on a round Earth, one of many millions of stars or planets floating around this random and arbitrary universe. No, we're special. We live under a dome. We were made by God. It's in the Bible. Don't tell me I'm not special. And when I look into these flat earthers, it doesn't really seem to be a belief in something. It's kind of basic denialism. You know, they just keep saying that things aren't true. And even when you prove it to them, if you get to the point where you can prove it with evidence, they just say, no, that's a conspiracy. No, that's a lie. They're fake. That's fake.
How many times have we heard that all photographs of the Earth, the spherical globe Earth, from space are all CGI? How many times have we been told that the moon landings were done on a soundstage in Area 51 on a green screen? How many times can we present evidence of Earth curvature? Mount San Jacinto, missing 4,500 feet of the lower part of the mountain from Malibu, on J. Tolan Media One's infrared photograph. How many times are we told that, well, that cloud bank out there is really Hudson Bay? These are things that we just do again and again and again, and it just goes in one ear and out the other. It's shocking in some cases.
They just say, no, that's a conspiracy. No, that's a lie. They're fake. That's fake. They will not give it up. And understandably, because it's like an addiction, things like the flat earth. And the problem with addictions is they make worse the very reason you got involved with them in the first place. These lonely flat earthers with no friends, with no status, with no meaning, with nothing in their lives, they take on the flat earth. And it gives them the illusion of status, the illusion of meaning, the illusion of community. But none of it's real. None of it actually functions. They're not friends with other flat earthers because they're all mad. They're all self-obsessed with their own focus on this thing that's providing their needs. You know, they've got no evidence for it, nothing that stands up. Most of these chumps can't even do basic trigonometry, and they've been called out on it countless times. So the illusion, the simulation of the things they need, they've been handed like a second-rate version of what they truly desire. And so they need more. So then they start denying space. Then they start denying other things. And then it ups the ante. And they get another hit of the illusion. And again, what the illusion gives with one hand, it takes with the other. And they end up further into their barbaric meaninglessness. They end up further into the void of loneliness. They end up further into the void of nothing, which is their real lives. And so the idea that you can get these people to give it up, the idea that you might be able to show them some evidence and they'll say, hang on a minute, yeah, you're right. Oh, actually, I'm going to abandon that nonsense. And then what they'll really be abandoning is themselves, cast back into the reality of their pointless existence, cast back into the honest look at what's happened to their life, with no one to blame, with no artificial community, with no artificial status. No, you won't be able to change these people's minds. They will need some kind of rehab. And they're absolutely obsessed with it. You know, it's all they talk about all the time. You know, they sacrifice other things in their lives for it. And the funny thing about that is, people who are obsessed with an idea tend to do so because they doubt it. You know, no one obsesses. It's like Robert Pirsig said in the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. No one obsesses over the sun rising or the sun setting because they absolutely trust it. When people obsess over something, when it consumes them totally, it's because it is laden with doubt. So these people who who have filled their lives with this nonsense are continually, relentlessly staring their own doubt in the face, which is a painful place to be. And while the better thing to do, the road to recovery, would be to let go of it all and then not have to live in that continual sense of doubt, what they actually do is double down and feed themselves more of it, just like an addiction. On the whole, these are broken people with broken lives, and they've sought to fix it with a broken idea.
You know, personally, I don't think the flat earth is quite that dark. I think that there are people in the flat earth that do it to, one, sell t-shirts, or two, buy t-shirts, because then they can have a little uniform that shows they're part of a group. I think that there are people that fear the unknown and don't understand science, and therefore look to flat earth to find some comfort in their sense of inadequacy of their scientific knowledge. I think that it's a substitute for religion sometimes, and I think that it promotes religion in that if science is wrong, well, maybe God did create everything. And if science is right, that shakes my belief in God. You know, I often tell the story of my mom's cookies. When I was 5 years old, she used to perform a miracle once a week when she would make cookies for me. I understand now that I'm older how those cookies were made, but it doesn't mean that my mom is any less miraculous or the cookies are any less delicious. I just can separate the magic of making cookies from the reality of making cookies. It doesn't change the fact that my mom's still pretty awesome. So let's go on to something that's a little bit more professional and a little bit more informed, and that is Dr. Todd Grande, who is a psychologist that has actually looked into this issue.
Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I have a few different questions about the Flat Earth movement. One question is, can I offer a critique of the film Behind the Curve, a 2018 documentary about the Flat Earth movement, and can I talk about some myths of the Flat Earth movement? So I'll answer both those questions in this video. So first, taking a look at this movie, Behind the Curve. We see here that it's been called a documentary about science, specifically a documentary about the scientific method being misunderstood, but it's also been called a documentary about mental health. So it's kind of interesting and in a way kind of controversial. Now, the people in the documentary were real, so I just want to make it clear that I'm not diagnosing anybody, just speculating on what could have been happening in a situation like this. Now, I've talked about this before, about mental health and the Flat Earth movement. Any given Flat Earther, that is a person who believes in the Flat Earth ideology, may have no mental disorder, they may have one or more mental disorders, they may have personality traits within a normal range, or extreme personality traits. Evaluation can only be done by a professional, in person, and in the context of a counselor-client relationship. So as I move to my critique of the film, I just want to issue this spoiler alert because I will be talking about a lot of different components we see in the film. Now, in terms of the documentary, I actually liked it in general. It was about 90 minutes long, and I think they could have got the job done in about an hour, but still, even at 90 minutes, I did like it. We saw some moments where the non-mental health experts in the movie, the experts from other disciplines like physics and engineering, still weighed in on the mental health aspects, which I don't think set the best example, but again, overall, I think the film was well done, and actually the topic was fairly important. Some have argued this movie really tried to make fun of flat earthers, but I didn't really see it in that way. Yes, I mean, there were moments where the flat earth believers kind of said things that really didn't make sense in terms of what was going on in the film and in terms of what they were saying in terms of their own beliefs. Like they kind of contradicted their own beliefs, or maybe in a few moments discovered for kind of a brief time that maybe their ideology wasn't logical, but then they kind of went back to their beliefs. So it may look like the film was making fun of them, but I don't really think that was the purpose of the film.
You know, I'm going to have to agree with Dr. Grande here. There were some, shall we say, really choice moments in that film. For example, this is the film where our famous Bob Nodell 15 degree per hour drift came from, and where Jared's interesting came from. Now, in both those cases, the evidence was right in front of the investigators, yet they seemed to start to recognize that their entire flat Earth idea was destroyed by the evidence that they were presenting, and then they just took a step back and went right back into the narrative. Now, that's not humorous to me. That's kind of a lack of critical thinking skills and a little sad, but that wasn't what this film was designed to do. This film was to actually look at some of the personalities and aspects of the flat Earth community, and it did that relatively well.
Now, in talking about the myths, some of the myths of the flat Earth movement, I'll be going through 7 myths here, and many of these are really tied to what we saw in the film, and I'm going to try to tie these myths back to the film whenever I can. So, myth number 1. Myth number 1 is that the flat Earth movement is not a movement at all. But actually, it is a movement, and it's also a conspiracy theory. We hear that it's just a scientific exploration, right? A theory. Several scientifically minded people working on a project. But that's really not what's happening. There is actually an us against them mentality, meaning us, the scientific community, and them, the flat earthers. And this is referred to as essentially the difference between good and evil in the film. So it's really not simply a promotion of scientific thinking. The flat earth movement is rather an expansion of ideology. And if you're trying to expand an ideology, you're part of a movement. Now, at the same time as being a movement, it's also a conspiracy theory. It's rare to find a flat earther who also doesn't believe in several other conspiracy theories. We see this mentioned in the film around the role of the CIA and the FBI and the anti-vaccination movement as well. So when somebody is a flat earther, if you talk to somebody like that, most of the time you're going to find they subscribe to a lot of other conspiracy theories, some of which kind of go along with the flat earth conspiracy theory. For example, many of them believe specifically that the government is hiding things. If you look at the flat earth movement itself, if you look at the ideology, a key part of it is this idea that the government is hiding information that would show the earth is flat. So in terms of the movement piece and the conspiracy piece, we see that it is both a movement and a conspiracy theory.
Now, I tend to agree with this a great deal. There are very few flat earthers that I know that don't believe that 9/11 was an inside job, or that we didn't go to the moon, or that there is something in the Antarctic Treaty, for example, that prevents us normal people from going to Antarctica, and that the Antarctica itself is patrolled. I don't even think I need to go into the feelings the flat earth community has about NASA. And I find that fitting right into the conspiracy, because NASA has the proof that the earth is not flat. So therefore you need to discredit NASA by saying there's some nefarious government organization. We all know that people that are in charge of NASA get together and conspire to lower the price of vanilla ice cream for all of us. There's got to be some sort of nefarious goal of these hidden groups that specifically are supposed to affect us.
Now, myth number 2 is that flat earthers are simply skeptical, right? These are just individuals who are high in skepticism. Well, scientists are simply skeptical, right? Flat earthers need to believe the earth is flat. They're part of a community. Skeptics are always looking to prove and disprove theories, and they're open to evidence that would serve to prove or disprove the theories. Flat earthers ignore evidence that would serve to disprove their theory and accept evidence that supports their theories. Essentially, a more extreme manifestation of confirmation bias. If we believe something, we tend to only look at information that supports that belief. Everyone does this. We see it a bit more here with the flat earthers.
Now, this is true in spades of the flat earth. They are not skeptics. If they were skeptics, they would acknowledge evidence to the contrary. because, as Dr. Grande says, skeptics look to prove or disprove something. People in the flat earth are not looking to disprove the flat earth. You can show them all sorts of evidence that any normal thinking person would realize disproves their premise, yet they will ignore it, or they'll make an ad hoc excuse as to why you can't accept that evidence. It's all CGI. A classic example would be the blue marble photograph, which was taken from Apollo 17 from space on film. Even though that shows a spherical Earth, it's CGI. Even though CGI really wasn't invented at that time, it's still CGI, because they cannot accept the fact that here's a picture of the Earth and, dude, it's round.
Myth number 3 is that flat earthers are simply at a disadvantage because they don't have the financial resources, knowledge about the scientific method, or access to equipment to run proper experiments. We see some good examples of how this is a myth in the film. We see that the one flat earther has access to a $20,000 laser gyroscope. We see another flat earther has access to a laser that he shot across the water. And although this experiment failed because the beam expanded too much, he understood the experiment failed and came back to do a similar experiment with a camera and a light. I would argue that many flat earthers actually do understand the technical aspects of the scientific method. They just fail to use it. So technically they understand how it works, but they do not understand the principles that drive the entire method. So they can see the small picture, but not the big picture.
You know, I agree with Dr. Grande in one aspect here. Flat earthers do understand what they're doing for the most part. But there are two problems that I have with him. First of all, if you know what you're doing, you can easily perform experiments on your own. For example, Blue Marble Science and I measured the circumference of the Earth with a stick and a shadow on the equinox. This is something that we're all capable of doing. I've personally built water levels that we can use to determine whether or not the horizon truly rises to eye level. That was less than $20 worth of equipment, and I have enough to make 5 or 6 of them. So we do have access to the tools that we need to decide whether or not the Earth is flat or spherical. But the problem that I'm running into is, and this comes from watching flat Earth videos for well over a year, people regularly put cameras an inch or a foot above the water to take maximum advantage of refraction to try and say that we can see longer than we should. This requires an understanding of refraction in order to do this. So these folks do know what they're doing, and they are deliberately trying to mislead people by taking advantage of something they're hoping somebody else is not aware of. Another problem that I ran into is the concept of scuba lensing, and I did a full video on this not long ago, where we have Rob Skiba going out with a Fresnel lens and showing that if you put a picture of the city of Chicago behind the Fresnel lens and move the camera along a table, the bottom of the picture of Chicago will disappear. This is taking advantage of the properties of the lens itself. And I demonstrated very clearly that using different parts of the lens causes different parts of that photograph to disappear. I did it with my son's Pinewood Derby car. I can make the bottom disappear, I can make the top disappear, and I can make the left and the right sides disappear, depending on where I put it in the lens. Skiba deliberately set this up to support his narrative that this lensing effect of the atmosphere, which of course he didn't demonstrate, made the bottom parts of objects disappear. So these are people that actually know what they're doing, but they deliberately manipulate their data to try and support their narrative. And I think that that's intellectual dishonesty. So I'm going to disagree with Dr. Grande on this one. I think a lot of the t-shirt sellers in the flat earth know exactly what they're doing and understand these principles well. And they are doing it deliberately to manipulate gullible t-shirt buyers into buying into their narrative.
So now moving to myth number 4. This myth says that flat earthers are unintelligent. This actually isn't the case. Intelligence isn't really related to extreme personality traits or mental illness. Again, not every flat earther would have personality abnormalities or mental illness. But when we look at personality difficulties and mental illness, we see that they can interfere with the application of intelligence. For example, lack of insight. There's an unwillingness to believe or not believe in certain principles. So, in essence, dogmatic thinking, which of course one could argue is the same thing as having some sort of interference in terms of intellectual ability. But I view this differently. When applying cognitive reasoning to other situations, flat earthers actually function fairly well. They function well in society. We saw in the film a guy who was making these really complex models. He worked on his motorcycle. We saw that engineer who operated the $20,000 laser gyroscope, and the guy with both the laser and the camera. These individuals seemed to function fairly well, and a number of individuals in the documentary actually appeared to function well in society.
You know, I think this goes back to the last point as well. Let's look at some of the people that are quote-unquote thought leaders in the Flat Earth movement. People like Anthony Riley and Nathan Oakley and Quantum Eraser. It takes a great deal of sophistication to design the arguments that they use. Now, for example, we'll use the scientific method. What they're doing is they're cherry-picking a very specific definition of the scientific method. And the reason that they picked that one is that that definition of the scientific method said that in order to be science, you have to have an independent variable. In order to be an independent variable, the investigator must personally manipulate it. Now, the only reason that they picked this particular definition is that allows them to immediately toss out theoretical physics, astronomy, seismology, and a host of other sciences as pseudoscience, because the individual investigator is not personally picking the location of the earthquakes, and they can't move planets themselves. A better definition of scientific method is that it's not a definition or a checklist. It is a method. The purpose of scientific method is to approach science from an aspect where you minimize the personal bias of the investigator. You come up with reliable and reproducible data, and then you apply logic and reasoning to come to a defensible conclusion that explains some sort of phenomena that you're investigating. The important part there is that it has to be defensible. And if you do a Google search for definition of scientific method, you don't come up with one response. You come up with pages of responses. Some have 5, 4, 6, 9 different steps, depending on what you're doing the investigation to evaluate, what kind of investigation it is, etc. These specific definitions and arguments are crafted to support the overall goal of diminishing the importance of science, for example, or diminishing the value of evidence to the contrary, such as saying the blue marble photograph is CGI, even though CGI hadn't been invented yet, and it was a photograph taken on a film camera. So I think that the people that are leading the Flat Earth movement, or the thought leaders of the Flat Earth movement, are actually quite intelligent, and they are specifically crafting an argument rather than looking for truth or evidence.
Myth number 5 is that the Flat Earth movement is the fault of scientists. In a way, this is brought up in the film around this idea of the scientific community failing to communicate in a compassionate and understanding way with the Flat Earth movement. And although it's noble to accept responsibility on behalf of the scientific community, this is a myth. This isn't the fault of scientists. A predictable portion of the population at any given time will believe in a number of conspiracy theories. I do think, however, that compassion is important, and I'll talk about this more in a moment.
I think this particular myth is one that really strikes me as being serious with the Flat Earth community. We all have access to the internet. We have access to the knowledge of mankind at our fingertips. Yet there's an old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. When people talk about science and research science on the internet, you have the tools that you need to do some very sophisticated research. there are many experiments that you can do with a minimum of equipment that will give you some rather profound findings that will settle this question one way or the other. Yet you have to want to actually do the investigation. You have to do the work behind it. You have to interpret the results correctly. You have to be able to recognize what you see, I think, is probably the best way that I could put it. And I think that in the Flat Earth movement, you have a lot of problems with people admitting that they actually see things. Let me give you an example. Now, this is a video that was done by Shawn Hawkins the other day on somebody that attempted to debunk one of my videos. And I want to demonstrate this gap right here between the top of the mountain and this shadow. You can clearly see the dark shadow, you can clearly see the dark mountain, and you can clearly see the light-colored clouds between the two. There's no question about that. Yet look at this gentleman's comment. Show the gap. You're looking at the gap, Mr. Toy. It's literally right there in front of you. You telling me that you cannot see that gap between the top of the mountain and the shadow on the clouds? Give me a break.
Myth number 6 is that we just need to keep bombarding flat earthers with facts, right? Meaning the scientific community. I certainly think it's a good idea to make facts available and to present them in a way where a wide variety of people can understand them. But ultimately, bombarding flat earthers with facts will change nothing about their beliefs. Or in some cases, it might actually make their beliefs more entrenched because the facts that contradict their beliefs become evidence themselves of a larger conspiracy theory. We see in the film how they react to evidence. With that laser gyroscope and the camera experiments, we see that both of those experiments actually offer strong evidence that the Earth is in fact spherical. I mean, in general, I'm not a physicist or anything, of course, but in general, they look like they were fairly good experiments. And the flat earthers themselves conducted those experiments. Now, the one said that he would have to work to prove his own findings weren't true when he found with the laser gyroscope that the Earth did seem to be rotating. So we see here that a lack of evidence isn't really the problem.
You know, this is a very true fact. How many times and how many videos are out there that completely disprove the evidence of flat Earth? How many times have flat earthers themselves gathered evidence that proves the Earth is a sphere? You know, we joke about Ranty Flat Earth as being the best global proponent that we have out there because his photographs constantly show a spherical Earth. Yet, if you ask Ranty, all his photographs really show a flat Earth, and we're just misinterpreting them.
Myth number 7. This is that flat earthers are dangerous. Generally, no. They're no more dangerous than anyone else. And I think this is really the wrong way to think about this situation. We see this touched on in the film just a little bit when one of the flat earthers was reading about a classroom where about a third of the students kind of went against the teacher when the teacher said the Earth was spherical. The idea here is that somehow this ideology is spreading, kind of contaminating the population, and that even flat earthers themselves may take extreme actions. That wasn't really covered in the film, but I've seen this argued before. So the individuals could be dangerous, and the ideology could be dangerous. Now what we see is this type of thinking of these individuals as dangerous, only pushes them more to the fringes of society. It makes them excluded, ridiculed, and feared. All conspiracy theories come at some sort of cost. Some are more obvious than others. For example, the anti-vaccination conspiracy theory, I think, is a lot more dangerous than the flat Earth conspiracy theory. But labeling flat earthers as dangerous simply isn't supported by the evidence, and I don't really see any strong evidence that the ideology is expanding at some incredible rate, and we have a lot of the population rebelling against the idea that the Earth is spherical. I think a more useful way to think about this is to offer compassion, accept flat earthers as people, maintain a respectful dialogue, refuse to make fun of them. Ridiculing flat earthers is not logical, and it achieves no meaningful goal. I think the compassion route makes a lot more sense, and for some, I think it's about access to mental health care. I think making sure that access is available makes more sense than all these various types of judgment and labeling. In the end, flat earthers are really just individuals who believe something that a lot of other people don't believe, because the evidence doesn't really support those beliefs, right? Most people believe the earth is spherical because the evidence supports it. So we have this small group that doesn't believe it, even though there's this contradictory evidence. That's not indicative of some sort of major problem. And I think among all the trends I've seen, again, the idea of ridiculing them, making fun of them, this really, I find, is so destructive. As somebody who works as an active mental health clinician, somebody who treats people with all kinds of beliefs, I don't find this as a good strategy. Again, accepting flat earthers as human beings, because they are human beings, makes sense and has a better chance of leading to change if that's the objective. If changing the belief is the objective, that'll do it a lot better than judgment.
Well, obviously, I do agree that ridiculing people for their beliefs, no matter how silly they are, is never really a good strategy to try and change those people. However, I believe that most people that are in the flat earth are in it for their own reasons. They're trying to support a narrative that meets some need in their own personality, be it a need for acceptance, or be it a need to feel somehow special or have special knowledge. But I have to tell you that as a debunker, my job, as I view it, is not to try and change flat earthers or change their minds. My job is to put out good information for people that may be looking into the flat earth that want to see both sides and are still open to looking at evidence and trying to make an intelligent decision on something that they're perhaps not as familiar with as others might be. We can provide this information to people that gives us good evidence to tell us that the sun is 94 million miles away or the moon is 240,000 miles away. You know, we're simply not here to change the minds of flat earthers. We're here to provide good information and STEM education for the people that still want it. Well, guys, thank you very much for spending a little time with me this evening. Remember, the Super Chat and Patreon are open. Make sure you hit that little like and subscribe button down there in the corner. And I hope that this was beneficial to people. So this is Bob the Science Guy signing out from Northern Michigan. Thank you again for stopping by, and we'll see you again soon.